Today, we are going to talk about MCP servers. It's a fun topic. I have a love-hate relationship with MCP servers. For anybody who is here and doesn't know roughly what an MCP server is, let's go over just briefly what it is, what they do, what they're for, things like that. Sound good? All right. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. In short, you don't really have to know what that is. It just means that it's a way for natural language processing tools like a large language model to interact with very specific APIs and tools that exist out on the internet. So normally, for example, if you want to interact with Supabase and do something within Supabase, you write code to do those tasks within Supabase, and then you run that code. What an MCP does is it has all of that code information stored, and it allows the AI tool to talk to the MCP server, and the MCP server translates the natural language into the code actions that are necessary to interact with Supabase. So you basically define your functions. I want this MCP server to be able to read the database. I want it to be able to access the authentication table and create, edit, remove users. Might be a security risk, so you probably wouldn't want to do that one in particular. But basically you set up rules, you set up tools that the AI can interact with. And then the MCP server is a way that the AI can talk to it. It's really, really cool. And at the same time, I find that the LLMs get confused by the MCP servers a lot. So you have to use them judiciously. I'm going to show you how to do that. And you have to keep an eye on what it actually does and sometimes give it really explicit instructions about what to use. You can't just assume that it will read the proper tools and understand what it has access to. That is my little spiel about what an MCP server is. You can explain them a lot of different ways, but that's how I explain it. MCP servers are what we're doing today. The thing to keep in mind is you need to be running your code locally on a system that has VS Code or Claude Code or some other IDE that's local. You can't necessarily run an MCP server in Replit. You can't connect to it, not easily. There's some workarounds, but it's not easy. Lovable, Bolt aren't really going to be able to talk to MCP servers properly. This is a tool set that you would use locally. We're working on getting some of the past calls uploaded to YouTube as well as the Patreon. Tutorials in Klein. Got it? Yeah, Klein is a great one to use. Klein is on, I'm reading the comments here for anybody that is interested. Sierra is talking about using Klein for coding locally, and that's a VS Code extension. So basically anything in VS Code, any extension you would use there can access an MCP server. So it's a really, really powerful platform for that. There are a lot of coding agents that you can use in VS Code. In fact, Windsurf and Cursor are built on VS Code. They're built on top of it. We are going to share this screen. Everybody see the PRD tool there? I always have that up because almost every call we end up using it for something. So it just stays up and alive. If anybody hasn't used this tool, you just type in your idea of what you're trying to build and it will generate a PRD that you can use to build it. Pretty cool. Probably type in a MCP server to build and it would give you the details. Okay. One thing about using AI to build MCP servers, and I'll break down more what I mean by this, but MCP is a very new platform and protocol, very new. Most AI models do not have current knowledge about how MCPs work. So you have to go find documentation about building an MCP server and load that into context before you would ever have it built your own. And I'll give you more details about why you might do something like that. But You don't have to build your own MCP server if you don't want to. You can use all of them that are out there. There's a ton. And I'm going to show you a few that I really like. MCP servers, this is a fairly comprehensive list of some of the top ones, but I'm going to show you another place to get cool server lists as well. There's a few other places that you can find lists of servers to use. And it's easy to want to go and install all of them that sound fun. And then you're going to create all sorts of problems for yourself. So we'll talk about how to not do that as well. I see, Tony, you mentioned now that Replit has a desktop install, use MCP with. I have not tested their desktop app yet. So I'm not sure if it has MCP capability. Have you explored that yourself, Tony? Have you opened that and seen if there's settings for MCP?
I did install it, but I don't know. There seems to be something strange. It asked me, did I want to install? So I said yes. And then it carried on using the web version, the browser version. So
okay.
It was a bit strange.
We will install it and see today, see if it has the capability or not. I have used the mobile app, but I haven't used the desktop app. I just tend to use Replit in the web browser. And most of the time I start something in Replit and then immediately pull it off to my local machine. That reminds me, I was saying earlier, we have a lot of videos that we're breaking down into pieces, previous sessions, and getting them put up into our YouTube channel. I emailed a couple of those out today, and Matthew is working very hard to get the rest of them broken down. These calls are too long to put on YouTube, so we have to break them into segments. And yeah, so he's working really hard to get those broken down and put out. But we have a couple sessions where I showed how to pull an app down locally. You would do that first prior to using an MCP server, and you'll be able to follow along with those a little bit as soon as we have them up in YouTube. Okay, so Replit is installed, supposedly. Let's get that pulled up on the screen here too, so we can play with it as we go along. Here we go. So let's take a look at MCP servers. There are a few here. These reference servers have a couple or three, maybe four options that are really, really helpful depending on the AI tool that you're using. The first one that I absolutely think is super critical is this sequential thinking. And I will show you it in action, but basically it forces the AI tool to think through what it's doing, and it does much deeper research than would happen with just giving it a prompt and saying, look through the files and do this and that. It gets even better if you use it with file system. The main purpose I find it very useful for is it allows the AI tool to load in full context of files. A lot of these LLMs, when you're coding with them, they'll read like 500 lines. And if they don't find what they're looking for, they'll read the next 500 lines. And they don't get the full context. So they might read the 500 lines that has what they want, but then they miss that there are certain calls in that later on in that file that require the information that they're getting ready to edit, and they'll mess up the edit and break the rest of the file. So file system loads in a lot better context to your AI coding tool. So it gives it a much bigger picture of what's going on. Now, some AI coding tools claim to do this already, like Augment claims to do a full file system index when you load it up for each folder. I've tested that and it's terrible. In my experience, I've used it 4 times and every single time it was just bad. So that's my experience. It could be different for other people. I've heard some people really love it, but I found it to not know what it said it knew and messed up file systems a lot. This file system MCP is a really nice one. Fetch is cool because it enables your tool with web search. Some apps like Windsurf have web search already. They can pull up links and look stuff up, but not all of them do. So Fetch gives web search capability, and it'll crawl a page and turn it into Markdown and then feed that back to the AI so it can read information. The one limitation to this is it only works if crawlers aren't blocked. So depending on the website you give it, it'll come back and say, I'm sorry, I can't open that page. Tony, you had a question here. Is that dependent on which model you're using? And I missed when that question came in. So what was the context I was saying during that?
I'm trying to remember now. It's when you were talking about the sequential thinking. Is that dependent on if you're using one of the ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude and so on?
No, it's model agnostic. And you can pair it with a thinking model. But what a thinking model like Sonnet for thinking, which is kind of one of the newest and hottest models for coding, that model will take information and then it will think through the process. And basically it's creating its own token store of information to extrapolate on. It gives you an answer based on that token store that it built up rather than just instantly responding to what you gave it. That's a good side topic. We should talk about that too, because that's really helpful to understand how that's working. So somebody here remind me in a couple minutes to talk about thinking models and how they work. The sequential thinking breaks the problem down into multiple questions. And then it goes through those questions and answers them one at a time. And if you pair it with a thinking model, then it does additional thinking on top of breaking that down. It works with any. It's extra powerful with a thinking model. One thing to note is using any of these tools may inflate your API token usage if you're doing key-based usage. For example, if I go over here and this is Windsurf, I have Claude Sonnet for Thinking enabled, and I'm using the bring your own key feature. So I've gone into Windsurf and I've given it my API key to use. If I work on an application for 2 hours, depending on what I'm doing and how many tool calls I use, that might cost me $10 to $20 in API usage, which would be less if I didn't use as many MCP servers. So we're going to talk about the balance there. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos like this, please like and follow. And if you need help building or finishing your app, click the link in my bio to book a one-on-one Zoom call to take a look at your project.